Yo, what's up? In this video, I'm going to talk about body fat percentage, specifically what's optimal for aesthetics, testosterone, biomarkers, health, etc. Because I see so much shit of people coping and saying that fat doesn't matter, and then you see so much on the other side, especially in like the fitness niche or like the primal diet where people are advocating getting hollow cheeks and getting super lean. And so we're going to sort of look at both sides and find the middle ground, so to speak, and see what's optimal. So let's get into it. So, firstly, body fat is an organ. It's not just like useless matter that just sits around. It actually has legitimate functions. So one of the things is an endocrine organ, so basically hormones. So four major hormones it produces is leptin, which is makes you feel full. And so if you have a lot of fat mass, it will take longer to release your leptin. So if you have more fat mass, you won't feel full as quickly. Adiponectin, which enhances your insulin sensitivity, which is obviously good to prevent diabetes and also has anti-inflammatory effects. Then you have resistin, which is like the opposite of adiponectin, which is elevated in obesity. So when you're obese, you have less anti-inflammatory effects and you have less insulin sensitivity, which leads to diabetes. And also, it will convert testosterone into estrogen, estradiol, which is the most potent form of estrogen in low amounts. There's this enzyme called amylase, which is in the fat, and it will convert your testosterone into estrogen if you have too much of it, which is obviously a bad thing. Apart from that, fat acts as an energy reserve, so it's actually very, very high density energy compared to like ingesting carbs, for example. Your fat can store a whole heap of energy in a very small space. So even super lean marathon runners can have energy for roughly, I think, 70 to 100 hours of walking. It's also acts as a thermal regulator. So you can see these different types of fat. There's white fat, which is mostly for energy storage, but then beige and brown fat is for thermogenesis. So not only does it actually insulate you, which is what white fat can do, it can like insulate you, but brown and beige fat actually actively burns calories to generate heat through non-shivering thermogenesis. So basically you're producing heat without like shivering. And fat also can sense temperature changes independent of the nervous system. So it actually has cells in there to feel heat changes. And yeah, if you're an adult, this is where your brown fat is stored, which is what produces heat. Fat also acts as a reproductive signal. So it communicates with the HPG axis, which is basically the axis between your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and your gonads. It produces leptin, which is what we talked about up here, satiety, and low leptin suppresses GnRH. So if you're too low in fat, then you don't produce enough GnRH, which cascades and means you don't produce enough testosterone. Whereas if you have adequate fat storage, you sustain your normal hormone production. Obviously not excessive, but you get that nice middle ground. Fat also acts as protecting your organs. It absorbs shock, like if you land on something hard or you get punched or whatever, the fat can absorb it, but also it actually absorbs toxins. Like you can see in this study here, numerous toxicants have been detected in adipose tissue, which is just fat, from various populations. Two of the most chlordane-related contaminants, trans non-alkyl and oxychlordane, were detected in breast milk and adipose tissue. And levels of PAHs, so just more toxins, were detected in adipose tissue. So basically your body will store toxins in adipose tissue, insulates again, which protects your organs through keeping them warm. And also fat absorbs your fat-soluble vitamins, so vitamins A, D, E, and K2, or in K, and they will store them. If you have excess intake of any of those vitamins, they'll store them in your fat. So then let's say the next day you don't eat enough, you'll be able to get them from your fat rather than having like a deficiency. And so fat is a necessary survival adaptation. But if you think about it evolutionarily, uh, first of all, just think about it evolutionarily is often a good thing in general. Like almost every single health marker is optimized by thinking, what did we evolve to do? What did we evolve to eat? How did we evolve to walk, etc., right? And so hunter-gatherer body fat ranges are around 13 to 20% for men and 20 to 35% for women. So you can see that's pretty much anywhere between like the upper end of this image to this image. And so it's a pretty big range, and that's generally what was common for hunters, which is then what's good for us to have. And so humans did evolve to carry some fat. Chronic surplus is modern, and chronic ultra leanness is also modern. So this 40% is a weird modern invention, as is the 3 to 4%. Both are terrible. And if you can see this graph, this is the relative risk of dying. So that's a hazard ratio based relative to body fat percentage. So you can see for women, 20 to like 25%, and it has a little peak, and again down at like 30-ish%. So basically, this little area here is the lowest risk of dying, whereas for men, it's down here at about 15 to 20%, which is still very, very low. As you can see, it's below 1, whereas the women's chart is just higher in general. So anywhere between 15 to 20%, even though it looks like a steep incline, it's actually not clinically significant. That's only between 0.8 and 1. And so that's pretty much the optimal level you want to be in. But you can see after 30%, it accelerates really, really dramatically. And yeah, there's obviously tapering off here. And so again, as a hormone signaler for testosterone, it's super important that you don't want to be too lean or too fat. So if you're super lean, you have testosterone suppression, you have elevated cortisol, like your stress hormone, because you're starving, so your body's in like a state of fight or flight. It thinks you're going to die. So it's trying to make you go crazy. It's increasing your cortisol, which reduces testosterone because cortisol, uh, increased cortisol suppresses luteinizing hormone, which suppresses testosterone. Decreased libido, so sex drive. You can see here this study on a male wrestler when he had excessive weight loss. He had much lower levels of testosterone and several other hormones, as well as reported decrease in reported sexual activity. It also downregulates your thyroid. And you compare that to being super overweight, it increases the aromatase enzyme, which converts testosterone into estrogen that we talked about. It increases insulin resistance. It lowers sex hormone binding globulin and leads to chronic inflammation. SHBG basically just regulates your free levels of hormones in your bloodstream. And chronic inflammation, if you've seen any of my other videos, pretty much causes every single health issue under the sun. But interestingly, even though this super lean thing decreases libido, you can also see here that if you're fat, the aromatase will convert testosterone into estrogen, which leads to lower testosterone, which reduces your libido, and you have high estrogen, which further suppresses it. So it's being super lean is bad for your libido, but seeing super fat is also bad for your libido. So basically, testosterone will thrive in metabolic stability, not extremes. Either extreme is bad, right? Next, we look at toxin storage. So I did touch on this at the start. Basically, your body in the modern world is exposed to so many different toxins, which are then absorbed. You can see this graphic here, from car fumes to like paint, tins, petrol, fluoride, etc. Right? Like you can rate the thing, smoking especially. And so a lot of toxins are lipophilic, meaning that they like fat, they're persistent, and persistent organic pollutants in particular, which is what these are largely, are ones which are generally lipophilic. So again, they like being stored in fat. And so adipose tissue will store them away from vital organs. Because obviously, best case scenario, you don't ingest any toxins. Best case scenario, you live a natural lifestyle and you don't get any toxins. But in the modern world, it's pretty hard to dodge toxins. And so realistically, if you ingest toxins, you would prefer them to be in your fat rather than in your organs. Like, you don't want pollutants in your heart or lungs or kidneys because organ failure is very terrible, whereas them being stored in your fat isn't as bad. And you see, even in studies, rapid fat loss can actually increase circulating toxins in the blood, temporarily, of course, but also chronic excess fat will be a long-term toxin reservoir because if you're constantly heavy and holding this fat, it will just keep building and building and building and building, and at some point the dam's going to overflow. You know what I mean? So fat will protect you until overload becomes chronic. This article I read here, it talks about adipose tissue. It acts as a protective barrier. A vast array of toxins we encounter are fat soluble or lipophilic. They dissolve in fat. When you can't process them through the liver and kidneys, it stores them within the adipocytes or the adipose tissue, which is temporary and is beneficial. It traps POPs, persistent organic pollutants, away from the brain, vital organs, which is great, but it creates a paradox because, like I said, the stored toxins are not entirely harmless. They can cause inflammatory changes within the adipose tissue, and they get slowly released into the bloodstream over time, which can contribute to chronic inflammation, metabolic issues, and other health problems. And so the fat isn't really like a perfect solution, but it's more just like a stopgap measure to shield the worst damage instantly. So obviously you don't want to be ingesting toxins at all. But one important thing is eating nutrient-dense whole foods is crucial to absorbing your necessary vitamins for detoxification and optimal liver and kidney function. So if you eat lots and lots of good nutrients, you offset the risks of toxins because your body can get rid of them at a better capacity, especially lots of fat-soluble vitamins because those are the ones that are stored in the fat, which can especially support liver function and act as antioxidants. Um, and again, you can see this diagram here. And so now when we look at energy and brain function, again, similar thing. Both extremes are bad. If you have extremely low body fat, you can have chronic stress adaptation. Again, you're in a state of starvation, and that's terrible for your health. But very high body fat, and you'll have metabolic inflexibility. And so the optimal range will support stable energy, libido, mood, mitochondrial efficiency, which is actually very important, and insulin sensitivity. So when we look at mitochondrial efficiency, the mitochondria, obviously, the powerhouse of the cell, basically the energy generating structure of your cell, what you use to produce energy. And so, yeah, it says here, obesity can alter the dynamics of mitochondria, causing them to fragment, making it harder for fat cells to burn energy. So if you're overweight, it's actually harder to burn energy, which is a real like negative fulfilling prophecy or self-fulfilling prophecy. And so yeah, the breakdown of mitochondria is tied to insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes, etc. Right? So in short, if you hold a lot of fat, it's harder to store, it's harder to burn it for energy, leads to insulin resistance. So it's like a negative cycle. The more obesity you have, the harder it is to burn the energy, the more susceptible you are to insulin resistance, the more you're likely to put on weight, the more likely you are to damage your mitochondria, etc. Right? It's just a constant loop. And so you can see here, people with high levels of abdominal body fat are at greater risk of brain atrophy. So their brain actually degenerates over time because of high body fat. Obviously, I'm not suggesting high body fat. And you can see this quote here from this David Perlmutter, who's this author of Grain, Brain, and the Better Brain book. He says, I believe the shift in our diet that's occurred over the past century from high fat to low carb to today's low fat, high carb diet, fundamentally consisting of grains and other damaging carbohydrates, is the origin of many scourges linked to the brain, including chronic headaches, insomnia, anxiety, depression, epilepsy, movement disorders, schizophrenia, ADHD, and other senior moments which quite likely herald serious cognitive decline of full-blown, irreversible, untreatable, and incurable brain damage. It's a mouthful, but basically the logic that grains are quite inflammatory and actually cause a lot of mental damages and decline versus high-fat diet. And I know that's a slight tangent of having body fat, but I just feel like lots of people cut their fat intake for health. But yeah, it's actually high fat diets is very beneficial for your brain and protective, especially since 25% of your brain or body's cholesterol is in your brain, and your brain is largely saturated fat. So it's super, super beneficial. So now we'll look at like the sexual selection signals. So again, for males, ironically or coincidentally, it's again the most attractive range for the majority of females is in the healthy range. So again, the upper end of this 12% to 20% is the most attractive range, and anything below or above it begins to lose appeal. It's completely makes sense evolutionarily and biologically because it's like a health signal of starvation. Like if you look at females, I'm assuming like if you're male watching this, like for me at least, it's pretty much like this, like from here to like 30% is what's good, is what attractive. This is a bit too much, and this is still all right, but it looks like a little bit lean. And if you remember the numbers that I said at the front, I mean at the very top, oh wait, I can't even find it here, 20 to 35% for women. If you look here, personally, the 35% is too high, but these three, which still fall within that range, are like the optimal levels. Though, like, I don't think this one's like too fat or this one's too lean. Like, they all pretty much sit similarly for me. And so logically, if you can understand that from a male perspective, then you can understand the same is true from a female perspective, from the 13 to 20%. And so again, it evolved. It makes sense because you want health indicators. Like, if you look like you're starving, like these two, it's not attractive because you have low energy and you have low survival because you need it literally shows you don't have enough nutrients, right? And so evolution, again, it literally selects for fertility markers, which is higher testosterone, energy, virility, which is not 3 to 4%, 6 to 7%. It's also not 25% plus. It's between this 12 and 20% marker. And again, if you can understand it from a male perspective, looking at the women, then you can understand from their perspective why you don't have to get super lean. So basically, what's optimal? 13 to 20% is where you want to be. If you're below 10%, long term, you have hormone trade offs, and above 20 to 25%, you have the metabolic risk rising. So you want to just be somewhere in the happy middle. For me personally, what I find is if I don't like track calories, which don't exist, I'll make a video on this, and if I just eat intuitively, I usually sit between 15 and 20%. Sometimes in like summer, it's usually closer to 15, and then in the winter, it's maybe like 18. I don't really get up to this 20%, but between like 15 and 18, which is pretty much smack bang in the middle of 13 to 20. And that's what I find feels the best for me. I don't ever feel hungry. I don't feel fat. I feel energetic. I have like optimal hormones, testosterone. Like, I just feel the best. And either side, either extreme, I've been on both ends, feel bad for me. And so, yeah, basically we just have this modern biological mismatch where we overshoot the surplus and then we overshoot the restriction. And you don't want to be either. We don't want to live in extremes. Humans evolved in stability cycles in a stable environment, and so you want to be smack bang in the middle in a healthy, normal body weight. So don't fall for all this like this looks maxing shit, and don't fall for like the fitness influencers. Eat intuitively, get to a normal, actually normal, safe, healthy body fat where you feel the best. And that might be different for different people. Like, I know some people who feel the best at 10 to 12%, and that's great. And I know some people who feel the best at 20%, and that's great too. But you just need to experiment with slowly dropping your body fat percentage. And especially if you're high up here, where the fuck's my mouse gone? If you're high up here around like 40 to even like 30%, the more and more you lose fat, you'll feel better and better and better and better. But as soon as you start to feel worse, that's when you know you need to put some weight back on, yeah? So just experiment with it, figure out what's optimal for you, and yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, I appreciate it. If you're still watching, thank you. And let me know what else I can talk about, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.